Hello and welcome to episode 21 of CGI Unpacked. And today we're talking about the inspection report on the management of organisational performance in the Public Prosecution Service for Northern Ireland, or PPS. I'm Jacqui Durkin, Chief Inspector of Criminal Justice in Northern Ireland, and I'm joined by the Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Herron, and the Senior Assistant Director for Resource and Change, Peter Luney. I'm delighted you're with us this morning. And also with James Corrigan, who's my deputy and lead inspector for this inspection. So, James, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a bit about what this inspection was about and what do we mean by organisational performance?
Organisational performance is quite a general term, but ultimately it's around organisations setting a vision, setting objectives and targets to achieve their key outcomes. So you'll see that in terms of performance plans and in terms of strategies. But it's also very important in terms of how you manage resources and how you allocate resources to meet those outcomes. I would also say it's important in terms of the partnerships and the effectiveness of partnerships with other organisations within the criminal justice system. And what we were also looking for in terms of organisational performance is the culture for continuous improvement and how organisations learn from inspections, of course, but also from other internal reports and feedback from staff. So that's a broad sort of outline of organisational performance. It's not the first time we've done organisational performance in the PPS. In fact, we've looked at PPS regularly over the last 20 years. The organisation was established in 2005 and we did the first inspection in 2007. We did an organisational performance and I think essentially in 2013 and lots of follow-up reviews and other inspections. So it has been a key part of lots of inspections, but this time is a bit more focused in terms of PPS as a standalone organisation and in terms of looking at what progress have you made over the last 10 years. In terms of how we've measured organisational performance, we've looked, I suppose as part of the inspection, we've done a lot of meetings with staff in across your organisation. I know you've got maybe around 450 staff at the moment. I would say I probably met maybe with a quarter of those staff during this inspection from all different grades and different roles and functions in the organisation. But also in terms of organisational performance, it's important as well to have those conversations and meetings with stakeholders, because you as the PPS sit at the centre of the criminal justice system, and those relationships you have with the police and with the courts and with the Attorney General and with other organisations, that really impacts on your organisational performance. So we did lots of meetings with stakeholder organisations as part of this inspection. So all of that really fed into the main findings of the inspection, and it led to the recommendations that we made in this report.
Stephen, independence and impartiality is something that's fiercely guarded, and rightly so. Yeah. And you said very clearly and publicly about the importance of safeguarding that. So in terms of organisational performance and what it means to you as a director, can you tell us a bit about this report and how it resonated with what you already were aware of as the director and what your senior team are involved in?
Absolutely, Jacqui, because I think it's very timely, the report. We're very glad to welcome it in our 20th year of operation as the PPS, and it is a good time for reflection on what the challenges have been up to now and how we can look at doing things differently. And I think a lot of what your report, the inspection, was guided towards is how you could help us do that. So I know as an inspectorate, you're an important part of the PPS accountability and governance mechanisms, but it's also an opportunity to support us with a transformation journey. And I think as an organisation looking at performance, we have probably very rightly been wedded to the idea of protecting our independence, about the independent processes we have around decision making. But that doesn't always lead to very good outcomes. So what we've done in more recent years is try to ensure that our strategic priorities, our PPS 2030 vision, and the reviews that we've had from the likes of business consultancy services are all designed to make sure we can deliver better outcomes aligned to the programme for government. So not surprised as an inspector to hear that my number one priority is speeding up justice. Because whilst we had good feedback from the recent Life and Time survey about the high numbers of the public who see us being independent and impartial in our decision making, there'd be less of the public, and politicians and media would say that the criminal justice system that we're part of is effective. So the big part of the organisational performance for me is how we become more effective now, because we have that independence, and yeah, we do safeguard it, but I think that's built into our DNA now. I think at times it's left us a bit isolated, which is probably something we'll talk about as regards our relationship with politicians, and we've tried to fill the gap. But we've got a very good platform, because what I was really pleased to see in your report, and James talked about how many staff you spoke to, we've such committed and engaged staff. They've had a lot of challenges with we're demand led, and the demand has sort of outstripped capacity for quite a while there, partly because of not having an executive. I'm 8 years as director, and about half the time there hasn't been an executive, and we get our funding from DOF. Good relationship with the funders, but we're not top of the priority when it comes to justice. That's policing, and people don't understand that we're not part of that Justice Minister portfolio. So there is a bit of an independence issue there, where we have been left without a political voice at times, and it's been up to us to try and fill that gap. And I hope staff do see that we've been trying to do that through appearances of the Justice Committee. We've got an ongoing engagement with politicians coming up. Previously, we had an event in Stormont in April there, and we're really trying to build on the fact that we are well known for high quality decision making. We are not as quick as we would like to be. The whole justice system isn't, but that's not the fault of staff. Staff have been working extremely hard. It's Peter and my job to get the resources, but the real problem for the criminal justice system is, in order to speed up, a lot of people are saying we need more resources. That is not realistic when you look at the current budget situation overall. So we really need targeted criminal justice wide reform. And that's where I think your report, looking at what we are doing for performance improvement, is really important in helping us focus on what is really going to help deliver better outcomes by 2030.
And I think it's in any public service that uses public money. Obviously, there's those checks and balances and controls around governance are critical. And with that comes that transparency around, well, what are you actually doing with that funding? So Peter, wanted to bring you in, as obviously you're relatively new confirmed role, and what are the challenges for you in saying, well, are we transparent enough, and transparent internally and externally about what the challenges are, but also what we are achieving with what we've got?
I think that is probably one of the key challenges for us as we move forward, and that was one of the key drivers for coming up with our cunningly named PPS 2030 vision. We wanted to recognise publicly that there was scope for us to improve and to use our resources more efficiently, and we wanted to set ourselves out goals and objectives for how we wanted to do that. So we developed the 2030 vision document, which looks both internally and externally about how we can make ourselves more efficient, more effective, geared more to probably dealing with the more serious complex crime, because that's where the growth is. We have seen a reduction in the lower end, and trying to dispose of that as efficiently as possible. The vision itself is based around a number of pillars. We look at proportionate processes, more effective processes, digital processes, and enhancing services to victims. None of those pillars will come as a surprise to you. They all make common sense. It's about trying to ensure that the lower end cases only come into the service if they need to, trying to use out of court disposals as effectively as possible. We've worked with police around the no file decision pilot to allow them to take decisions in certain cases there. And those initiatives have contributed to the reduction that we've seen in the lower end case rate 5 to 8 caseload. There is still much more scope for that to grow. I think we see things like we still have a huge amount of road traffic cases coming into the courts. An awful lot of them may be fixed penalty cases, which have come because people didn't submit their driving license in time, and they end up going through an expensive prosecution process, an expensive court process to get the same outcome that they would have got if the ticket had been accepted. So there are lots of ways for improvement to be delivered there. I think that it's important as well that the 2030 vision, while it is largely internal, it does look beyond the boundaries of PPS. improving the criminal justice system isn't something that we can do in isolation. We need to work much more closely with the police to drive up things, or drive up quality of files as they're coming in, because that's an inhibitor. We need to work closely with judicial colleagues to try and improve how cases are managed when they get to court. End-to-end system improvement is what is required to see the improvements that the public deserve. And that's why the alignment between PPS 2030 and actually the Criminal Justice Board's transformation programme is probably very positive.
So I want to ask you, obviously Europe, and Stephen's mentioned already, the reliance on professional and high quality staff to actually deliver your service. So how, in a regional organisation with a spread across Northern Ireland, can you tell us a bit about what sort of buy-in you've had internally to that PPS 2030 vision, and how as senior leaders do you make sure there's that message is consistently embedded throughout the organisation?
Yeah, so the vision document was developed as a result of engagement with managers, staff across the organisation. It was listening to the things that frustrated them about case progression and things that were inefficient within our processes. So there was a lot of common sense within it. To try and make sure that it had the buy-in from staff, we also then used the simple approach of looking for quick wins. So we identified projects which could be delivered relatively quickly, or that staff would begin to feel the benefit of, so that they could then support the programme as we then tried to deliver the more difficult longer term reforms. So we have done things around the no file decision pilot. The gateway system has been up and running for domestic violence summary offences. There are lots of positives there that staff can touch and feel, and I think that's the important thing. It's about being able to see the results coming out of it.
So in terms of the visibility or the messaging between what the vision is and what that looks like when it's delivered on the ground, how do you make sure that happens?
I think communications is key to it. I think we have in the past struggled with effective communication. I think even when we have sort of proactively tried to engage with staff, the method that we've done it sometimes hasn't been as successful as others. And we did a sort of an all staff video call, but it felt quite one directional. So we've learned from that. And we're now using a range of communication tools, a lot more face-to-face engagement going out around the offices, to make sure that we're continuing to keep staff informed of how the programme is being developed. We had for our 20th year, we had quite a large staff conference in Titanic Belfast, and it was focused around sort of the modernisation programme, but also welfare and resilience. And actually the feedback coming out of that conference was really positive, and we need to try and harness that and move forward.
It's hard in an organisation that covers the whole of Northern Ireland to make those kind of visibility points meaningful and authentic, isn't it? It's difficult when you go in to visit staff, and now you get in, they're going to tell the senior staff, senior leaders really what's going on, and I appreciate that's difficult. Stephen, you mentioned earlier about one of the strategic recommendations being about that, having a look at if the current governance arrangements and the ability to have that voice, as others, you've mentioned other major organisations like police and prisons and the Youth Justice Agency and probation, they have that voice through the minister, and because you're funded differently, it's about, while there are opportunities, I mean, how do you think things could improve for you as the director in making it more apparent to the Assembly and not just to the Executive or the Justice Committee what's really going on in the PPS?
Well, I think as an organisation, historically, we've always been quite nervous of political engagement, because we know just the way Northern Ireland is, it's divided. Some decisions, particularly around legacy, are going to be received well on one side and maybe not so well on the other. And that's just our lot. That's the prosecutor's lot. You take the decisions in accordance with the law without fear or favour. But I think there's a lot that we have to engage with them on, where they should be jointly brought in to try and improve violence against women and girls strategy, speeding up justice. There are things that across the wide political spectrum, I would expect all MLAs to be bought into. So regardless of their sort of concerns about not being able to influence decision making, I think they do respect the rule of law. But where the conversation needs to move to is now, okay, there seems to be a lot of times when you hear politicians coming out and talking about the lack of police resources and defending the independence of the judiciary, we sort of get missed out in the conversation. Yet we sit at the heart of the justice system. And coming back to Peter's point about staff engagement, I think staff probably have thought we should be more visible. You got chief constables and justice ministers nearly weekly talking about police resources. I think staff would expect us to be, also trying to be visible and high profile about the need for more prosecutors, more administrative staff and victim witness care unit staff, court clerks, etc., because there's been an increase in the more serious casework.
It's that domino effect, isn't it?
It's that domino effect, but I have to say I am wedded to the need for transformation, because my concern would be, even if the magic money tree was shook and we all got a lot more money tomorrow, police, courts, ourselves, I just think we'll have a more expensive system that's equally as slow without targeted reform.
Yeah.
It's been a journey to bring staff with us there, because I think they've been doing extremely well to keep the show on the road. Without the dedicated staff we have, legal, administrative staff across the organisation, we'd be in a lot worse position. And I think, you noticed that whenever you're talking about the commitment of staff. And for me, the real positive in starting out and talking to others about what the PPS product is that we, in the people survey this year, came out highest of staff who were bought into the organisational objectives and purpose. So our staff know what we're about, and all they want to do is deliver for the public and for victims. They were also bought in about job satisfaction. So for me, those are the two most important indicators in that people survey. We have engaged and committed staff, and our job is now to let politicians know about how that can be harnessed. And what we need to do is have system-wide reform that looks differently at how we deal with lower level offending, because politically that can be a controversial subject, because they think that's a sort of going soft on crime. But the whole purpose behind it is there's not enough resources to do everything to the same standard as we're doing now.
That's a whole different podcast I'd want to do, Stephen, around, out of increasing out of court disposals, and how do you manage that conversation and that message about, is it dumbing down justice? But what we and James through this inspection and other inspectors are very clear about is that the confidence in justice piece is as much for the PPS as it is for policing. A lot of people tend to think of, that's about policing, but it's not, because the gateway into any court is, mainly 99.9% of the times through the PPS. So I take it then that you're up for those conversations about more visibility and transparency about the PPS, and having potentially a political voice on the floor of the Assembly who knows what's going on in the PPS, and there's more, I suppose, again, transparency around that.
No, 100%, Jacqui, I'm up for that, because as director of two main jobs, firstly, I have to ensure that prosecutions are taken correctly, and then people are brought before the court that shouldn't be, and when they are brought before the court, cases are prosecuted robustly. So I need the necessary resources to do that. But I'm also the accounting officer, and I have to deliver value for money. And I think that's something that sometimes is a difficult balancing act, because, recent talk about just overspend, and we can claw it back later. For me, that's not a responsible way to go, and we have to try and drive transformation that is delivering better outcomes by doing things differently. So part of that is trying to do things differently as regards getting insight into the Assembly for them to hear what the pressures are. And I think that there's definitely scope for talking about PPS policy, practice, procedure, performance that doesn't impinge on our independence. I think whenever we appeared at the Justice Committee in 2021, I did say, look, I would like to come here at least twice a year and talk to you about things that are not necessarily decision related. Now, that was coming shortly after the Bobby Story decision. And of course, there was a lot of politicians want to talk to you about particular decisions. And that is what is protected in the legislation, is that you can't do that. Yeah. But I do think we can find a way, either for a minister or the attorney, and I think that was what was always proposed, to answer questions that are quite valid about what is the PPS doing to be more effective? What's it doing to deliver better for victims? What is its policy on hate crime, non-fatal strangulation cases, all things that are of interest to politicians, but does it in a way that is about trying to deliver on the programme for government, actually, on speeding up justice and improving the situation as regards violence against women and girls.
James, I want to bring you back in here because there's some other recommendations as well. And I suppose key to those, and both Peter and Stephen have mentioned about, reform and digital services and the opportunity to maybe there's still a lot of a lot of paper still in the PPS. So what do you kind of think are the main recommendations that hopefully there's already work underway to try and address that? But from what you saw during the inspection, where do you see as the major pinch points?
You're right. I think people would be surprised how the criminal justice system and yourselves in PPS is still such a paper-based system. And there's so much inefficiencies in terms of that paper-based system. So I do think, and it's not something unique to yourselves, but I do think there's huge potential benefits in moving to a much more electronic system. And it was extraordinary when we walked around the PPS and the offices and we'd seen, the amount of activity that was centered around paper files. So I think that's certainly that better use of technology. And I know you're moving towards electronic signing of summonses, and that's a positive development. So there is big good progress in terms of technology, but it's a case of more embedding it into your core processes and delivering those benefits. I think there's an important recommendation around people, because you mentioned your people are critical in terms of delivering your service. And we, of course, met with a lot of your people, and they were very open in terms of their views around the performance of PPS. And I recognise the commitment, and I recognise the sort of dedication, and they do like their work. But there were frustrations, and there's frustrations around sometimes that disjoint between senior management and other parts of the organisation, and that came across in other reports as well. It wasn't just in our inspection report. So I think there's work to do there in terms of communication and aligning, I suppose, your vision and your strategy to the real work of individuals on the ground. And I think as well, and it always linked in with the budget, but there is definitely more that needs to be done in terms of your workforce planning and your people plans and your people strategy to make it longer term and align it with your vision. Because certainly what we found was, much more short-term approach to workforce planning. And I know you've got this reliance on agency staff, which I think makes up almost 20% of your workforce at the moment. So it's a case of sort of moving away from that model and having your own, I suppose, permanent staff in place to deliver, I suppose, against your objectives. I would also say there's something more around you being able to sort of measure success against your outcomes or against your results, and that's about having an outcomes framework, and that's long term as well. So we want to see progress in terms of developing that outcomes framework. And I suppose the final point I want to make is around the performance in the courts, because certainly from our discussions with those staff that work within the courts, but also those that have responsibility for oversight in the courts, is there's a gap, I think, in terms of knowledge of what your performance is in the court. And of course, as Jacqui said, the courts is essentially, that's the public face of the PPS.
Yep.
And having that knowledge and that awareness and being able to monitor performance in the court and what's happening in the court and how that impacts on the organisation is crucial. So I suppose that's another recommendation we'd wish to see progress over the next, over the next year or two.
So what do you think the PPS will look like? I'm going to ask each of you, what do you think the PPS will look like by 2030?
I think we will be probably a smaller organisation, but which is more focused on the more serious, complex work. I think that will become our priority, and we will try and find ways of dealing with what remains of the lower level work as efficiently as possible. I wanted to touch upon just a couple of things that James mentioned there, if that's okay. So the digital side of things, absolutely. We still have a huge amount of paper in the system. Even where we have digital processes, I mean, we have Causeway, we have our line of business system, we have, for magistrates courts, we have the electronic case file, but we tend to operate in an analog system with analog processes. So our prosecutors go across to the magistrates courts with their iPads, but there's still summonses, court processes, the judges are still working off paper, so there's a need for the whole system to transform. We have made some good headway recently, so we've implemented a new cloud-based system for sharing digital media, and that has the potential to grow to sharing all kinds of formats of files. But it would be better as part of the would be better as the criminal justice system as a whole to develop something like the digital case system that they have in England, which is based on the Case Lines product, which we've talked about for years and years. So that would be very positive. On the performance metrics as well, I think, yes, there is a need for a wider outlook and that outcomes focus, and we very much welcome that recommendation. We have, I think I said to you when you were doing the inspection, we're coming down with data. We have management information reports coming out of our ears. Our trade union colleagues would say, perhaps slightly unfairly, that we're an organisation that's obsessed with metrics. I don't think we are. I think we have a lot of information, but I think we need to distill that down into what's the key information? What's the key information that we need for managing performance in the PPS? It's not just about taking decisions. It's about what happens after decisions. It's about the churn in the courts. It's about how we manage that. It's about how do we join up our metrics so that we're looking at it jointly with key partners like the police. At the minute, metrics can incentivize perverse behaviours. So we know that one of the things that we suffer from is files being submitted too early because it was coming up to a deadline for the police. So we've agreed with the police that we'll take joint responsibility for both those stages, from police to decision by PPS. And we'll work together to try and bring that down collaboratively, because some of that gateway file quality improvement work that we're doing will initially displace delay into the police stage because they're working harder to prepare the file. But over time, that will reduce end to end.
Yeah, I mean, it's hand in glove stuff, isn't it? They're both operationally independent. They're independent of decision making, but it's so dependent. What the police do and the quality of what they give to you is so dependent on then what you're able to do with that. So Stephen, final question to you, where do you think the PPS will be by 2030?
Well, Jacqui, I'm happy to say positive and optimistic that the PPS will be in a better place. Firstly, in terms of delivering for victims more effectively, in terms of improved outcomes, I would think we are in a good position. Peter and myself and others in the PPS have worked hard to close the funding gap that we've had. So we have stabilised the workforce. We are very reliant on agency staff, and I'm very grateful for all the efforts that they've put into keeping us afloat. But I want to assure staff that we recognise the good work that they do. It's our job to help them do it, because given them the tools and the resources, and that does mean transformation, but we've got, say, highly professional, engaged staff that I think have the means to improve service delivery. I think we've got the plan to do it through PPS 2030. So by 2030, I want to have myself influence politicians, the Assembly, those with influence more about recognising the good work of the PPS and recognising that sometimes while it's okay to challenge the PPS, you also occasionally have to champion the good work that we do and recognise it, because whenever they talk about delay and unacceptable outcomes, we recognise that occasionally does happen, but it really undermines that day and daily PPS staff do deliver. You look at put the news on every night, there are convictions, there are cases that have come to court that we've had to work hard with police to get there, and that's thanks to everybody in the PPS. It's not Peter or I, it's all the staff who have done that, and I want that to be more recognised, and say our independence around decision making, our integrity hopefully is respected, but it's the effectiveness and the efficiency that I hope by 2030 we're more recognised for.
Well, thank you for attending and taking part in our podcast today, and thanks to you and to your entire PPS team for the work that they're doing. I think I said at the outset, this inspection report is very much about supporting you as you move forward and transforming as an organisation, but obviously the very many hats that you have to wear as well, whether it's accounting officer, director, on the Criminal Justice Board, having that voice in front of the Justice Committee or wherever that may be. And we certainly are encouraged by what we've seen. but hopefully these recommendations will help you move forward as well in the future. So thank you to you too, James, for participating.